once I took this job at Pluralsight, the time I spent coding went way down. So one of the nice things though is that every quarter, as part of the corporate culture, we do what we call a hack day. Is anyone familiar with this concept? No. So a lot of companies are doing this now. Netflix, in particular, like a lot of the innovations you see coming out of Netflix are just employees doing stuff on Hack Day. And the idea is that you take a day off of your normal duties and spend that time working on a project that you think is going to benefit the company in some way, right? And you just sort of form ad hoc teams and get stuff done. So, I usually end up working on 2 or 3 of these teams, and then I'll be doing stuff on my own as well since I'm remote. But at the last Hack Day, we had I developed the stuff you're seeing today, and other teams developed a lot of data systems and stuff like that. So it was just everything from user experience to marketing efforts to anything else. So here's the problem, right? I joined this team, the curriculum team at Pluralsight, and they're over-tooled. I mean, that's in the sense that they use Trello for some things, right? We also use Salesforce. Is anyone familiar with Salesforce? Yeah, I hate Salesforce. I really do. But the sales guys and everybody love it, and I don't know why. But I don't have a business mind. I really don't. So I'm not gonna complain. But so they use Salesforce for a lot of stuff. We also use something called Smartsheet. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's an online spreadsheet. It's really powerful. The problem is we have data crammed everywhere now, right? And so when you want to when you're talking to an author, for example, part of my job, when I'm talking to an author and they're asking well, I want to do a course on SSIS in the cloud and Azure Data Factory. What do you guys have going on in that space? Hang on a second, and I got to open up all this crap and all these browser windows to try to do that. So it's not ideal, right? The tools are great. Trello's great. Anyone use Trello? Highly recommend it. Yeah, it's dirt simple. It just works. That's what I have up on the screen right now. So the idea, Trello is just a task tracking system, and there's a Chrome extension called Toggle that will add a little Pomodoro timer to Trello, which is really handy. But yeah, so this is my to-do board, and I've got stuff on there that I need to do, stuff that's in progress, stuff that I've done, stuff that I've just abandoned, and it's just a way for me to keep track of the things that need to get done. We have other ones. I'm not going to show them to you just out of respect for my company, but we manage everything pretty much on these Trello boards. Our proposals go through them as part of the pipeline. Auditions when new authors come in, everything from even our newsletter topics. When we get an idea, we just throw it up on the Trello board. So it's a very often used tool. So Salesforce is kind of the same thing. When we have conversations with authors, we got to go into Salesforce and update those fields and make sure that everybody knows what's going on with this guy and his course and etc. So what I did for Hack Day. You can imagine the problems, right? I don't have to explain to you that, when you're updating data in 3 places, that sometimes one of those places doesn't get updated, and so if that's where you look, you get false positives or false negatives, and there's a lot of misinformation floating around. So one of the things that I wanted to do was to create sort of a common way to access all that data. I'm not calling this internally we call it the one tool that we're looking for that will solve this problem for us. That's not what this is. This is really just me hacking some crap so that I don't have to bounce around all day long trying to pull information from different sources. I can actually go to one place and pull that stuff out. So just to give you an idea of what I did, I'm just going to give you a really quick demo. So I have PowerShell open, and so here I have my to-do board, right, on Trello. And I have PowerShell open now. One of the things that I did was I created a Trello module for PowerShell that would actually let me connect to my Trello account and pull down the boards. So I'm going to import my Trello module. I have to spell it right. All right. And just to give you an idea of what this thing can do. So like I can get the list of boards. I can get the list, or I can get the boards. I can get the lists on the boards, the cards in a list, the actions that have been taken on a card. I can create a new board, which is very exciting. Create a new Trello card. So, like if I do a get Trello board, it's going to return a mess of stuff, right? There's a whole bunch of data that comes back. And again, like this is just a hack. There's no formatting, so it's not pretty. So let me pretty it up for you. Like if I do a select, we'll do ID and name. Yeah, so these are all the boards that I have access to. And you can see like near the bottom, there's my to-dos list. Like I'm actually able to go in there and I can pull the cards off of there too. I can say, okay, find the Trello board where the name matches to do, or match, excuse me. All right, so again, I'm just using regular PowerShell semantics to filter that data that's coming back from the Trello API. And if I want the Trello cards, I can do like the get Trello card. Right, and it'll actually pull all the cards down from that board so I can look at the data that's in them. So I do this kind of stuff quite frequently, like with the proposal board. You know, the question comes up, do you have anything in the pipeline around, I don't know, Angular? Well, yeah, probably. I probably don't have to check for that one, actually. But like a good one is BIML, right? There's a ETL thing from a company called Verigence named BIML, and we're just now starting to percolate courses out on it. So when a question comes up about it, I can pull down the proposal board and look in there and see if we, what do we have going on that's got the word BIML in it, right? Which actually is a lot easier to do on the console than it is to come in here, right, and actually look at this board and try to figure it out on my own. Trello, the UI in Trello does have this filter feature. Where is it? But it's kind of atrocious, right? It's a literal string that you have to match like the beginning of, and so if you don't know how the string starts, and it just doesn't work. But if I pull the cards down in PowerShell, now all of a sudden I can filter on them. Like if I'm like, okay, well, I don't even know what they look like, so let me pipe them to get member and see what fields we're working with.
Good question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So at this point, what you're because you don't like the interface of Trello, you decided to write, a module that will get you that same data from their REST API and go from there.
Yeah. So that's the next step of the conversation is how this works, right? And so that is we'll talk about the REST API, and the big part of that is authentication, right? I don't know if any of you are familiar with the OAuth technology, but a lot of APIs are using that now because everything's on the web, right? Including your client, obviously. That's which isn't true with PowerShell, so we got to kind of be creative to get around that. So anyway, and I'm not going to belabor on Trello, but I can do the same thing with Salesforce too. And I can search Salesforce. Let's see, what do I want? I want we call them accounts. I want an account, and I'm going to filter the account where the name is like Jim. And it should bring up me along with everybody else. But you can see that it's actually trying to authenticate, and it's not going to because I forgot to do something. But let me show you what that looks like too. Okay, first off, is that still readable in the back? Yeah, right. Well, yeah, I'm just. So let me support Salesforce. All right, did I close that one? Yeah. What was it? Search Salesforce and the object type I want is an account, and the filter I want to search on is name is like Jim. Let's go ahead and return the top 10. So I haven't connected to Salesforce yet, and God willing, this will actually work because it is kind of spotty. But you see, it's actually going out to Salesforce and saying, I need to connect. It's actually not working. There it goes. So it goes out to Salesforce, does the OAuth authentication with Salesforce, comes back, and we'll talk about how OAuth works in a second. But bottom line is, you need your own web server running to have OAuth be able to authenticate with your local client. So it comes back, does the authorization, and then if I go back to PowerShell, it's actually working. And I can, now that I'm authenticated, I can do the same thing. Give me a name, guys. Right, there's all of our authors with the word Bob. And so that was actually the really tricky part, was sort of digging into OAuth. I mean, I'm a developer, I've done OAuth before, but again, it's always been like with a web-based thing, like my server's talking to their server, so I've got a web page that I can use the user to direct them over there and come back. It's just a mess. Who's not familiar with OAuth, by the way, just because I want you guys to appreciate how freaking difficult this was. All right, so do you guys know, like, when you go to a website and they say, hey, you want to log on with Facebook or Google or whatever? That's OAuth, basically. It's a way for one web server to sort of pass to or receive credentials and identity information from another entity, another web server, and to do so in a secure fashion. And what it basically amounts to is configuration on both ends, right? So like when I can authenticate with Salesforce because I've gone into Salesforce and said, I have this client that's going to authenticate with you. Here's a secret I'm going to pass you to make that happen. And in response, Salesforce, I've given it a URL to go back to finish the authentication. So like there's this kind of like handshake between the two servers. They know how to talk to each other, right? And again, when you're in PowerShell, you don't have a web server that's just sitting there, typically. So I had to roll something. Right. So let's start looking at some code. The Trello one's actually pretty easy. Let me open up the Salesforce one.
How much of what you're showing us is available? Is it on GitHub right now?
No, not yet. I don't know if we're going to do anything with it, but yeah, generally speaking, this code is property of Pluralsight. So, but they don't care. Like, this isn't their business crucial things. These are literally like the hack that Jim did. So let's talk about authentication first, right? So like if I do, we'll start. Let's actually do kind of like a trace of what I did. So I typed search Salesforce. This is the function that got called when I did that. And if we look at what it does, which is I haven't looked at it in a while, but basically it's kind of parsing out the parameters and piecing together a query string. Right, Salesforce has like a very SQL-like query syntax for its stuff. And then when I'm ready when I have the query all configured right here, I calculate the URL, or I build up this URL. And again, how do I know what that URL was? There's a reams of documentation behind any of these APIs, Trello or Salesforce or anything, and it's all in there. So I just go in there and I format the URL correctly, and then I call this ubiquitous function get Salesforce object, and I pipe the URL to it. And if you look at get Salesforce object, which I just lost my place, there it is. When you look at get Salesforce object, the core of it's just calling the invoked REST method when it's part of the core API and core commandlet library of PowerShell just includes this, right? So I can pass it the URI I want to hit as a REST interface and tell it what authorizations I want to pass in the headers, and it just works, right? In theory, it just works. The real trick, right? So like the way I'm authenticating with Salesforce with this request, right? It doesn't know who I am. HTTP is stateless. So when I make the request, the server's like, I don't know who you are. So I've got to give it something to identify myself. And it's this little thing we put in the headers. And again, this is part of the OAuth spec. It's an authorization header. And in this case, for Salesforce, it's the word bearer and then some token it gave me in the past. And that's the trick. How do I get that token? And that's part of that whole OAuth authentication process. And this is where things just get weird. All right. So I have this get Salesforce token function, which if we look at that, should be right at the front. So I'm storing a token If I don't have it, or if I already have it, great. I just return that. Otherwise, we got to try a couple of things. So I have this function here, get Salesforce code, and this is where it's doing the OAuth handshake with the server. Yeah.
Jim, if you go up a little bit,
Yep.
the top of the function.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Get Salesforce token, active token, variable. Is that where's that scope?
It's scoped to the script, or technically the module. Yeah. So again, I actually didn't have to put that script scope in there, but that's probably a holdover. Like when I started working on this, it was just a PS1 file, and I was having collisions, so I put the script scope in there. And again, that's what I mean. This is hack. This is not clean. This is it's working. Let's throw it in the thing and move on. Are there any other questions before I move on? All right. Thanks for asking as we go. All right. So I'm trying to acquire the token, and I need to get the Salesforce code. So this is where things get kind of wonky. So what I'm actually doing, there's an open source thing called Posh Server, which is an amazing little tool. It's actually a little tiny web server that you can just import and host, and literally like just like I import the module here, import module Posh Server. I create a small job script that actually starts the server so it doesn't interrupt my session. And then and inside of that job, like right here, like that's really all I have to do. All I have to call is start Posh Server. And I just tell it that I want it to use SSL and tell it what the port is and whatnot. And then I tell it what's your home directory, like where do you live. So one of the things that I want you to notice about, like this is the web page that Salesforce opened when I authenticated with it, right? And this URL that you see in the header, like literally, go to https://home port 8898. That's configured. I configured that on Salesforce for my access token. I had to go in there and say, this is the URL I want you to use when I authenticate to return the token back to me. And if you look at the code in here, I'm actually opening the server and having it run on port 8898 using SSL, right? And the real trick is telling it, there's this home directory I want you to use, which turns out to be this folder. It's one of my modules folders, yeah.
Is that the web server running within that session?
Well, I run it as a job. Let me put that code back up there. So, yeah, so that job script variable actually contains a script block that starts the server, right? But I haven't run the script block yet.
In the script block, you got a couple of parameters. Where are you passing those parameters to the script block?
Right here. So, so one of the things, so I define the job script that I want to use to start the server, and then I need to gather the configuration data, which I do right here. So where's the server live? Well, what's the server's home directory? I basically figure out, well, where's this Posh Server module installed, and then go to up a relative path to this folder, OAuth local server. Find that path. Like that's the folder I want you to use as home. All right. So once I find that, then I'm able to start the job right here. And tell it, start the job with these two parameters, and it's actually the same value, but the first one is the home directory, right? So server home dir gets passed in as home directory there, which is then passed to start Posh Server in the job, right? So all of that mess literally is just to start this asynchronous web server on my local machine that's based in that directory, right? Any other questions about that before I dig a little further? So the other thing I want you to notice is that inside of the address bar, the document it's opening is authorized.ps1, which is a PowerShell script, right? And technically this is running on my local machine, and it's part of this Posh Server context. And if I look at that folder that I'm pointing to as the home folder for Posh Server, there's authorized.ps1. And if we look at it, it does very little, right? Quite literally, we have a couple of variables here. Posh query. This is stuff that's defined by Posh Server. It's all documented really, really well. But basically, the Posh query is coming in, and I'm just pulling variables out of the HTTP request. Like in this case, it looks like the query string. I'm looking for a code variable in the query and a state. And if you look at the, there's the code part of the query, and then somewhere down the line, actually it's right there, is the state. All right, so I'm just pulling those things out of the request. And once I have the code, that's the piece that I need to finish the authentication. All right, so I actually write that out to a temporary file that I use in my session. And no, it's not encrypted. This is hack day, okay? This is not enterprise solution day. So yeah, so I write the code out to a file, and then once I've done that, I have all the pieces I need. Like, that's all you have to do, right? And I have all the pieces I need that I can actually talk to the Salesforce server as Jim Christopher, right? So as I've authenticated, I've given my permission to use this client to Salesforce, and I've gotten the code back, and I'm ready to go. Right. So so once I have that code, once I know it's on disk, let's see where to go. All right, so yeah, so once I have the server set up and that exchange is ready to happen, I just open up, I just create a process that starts the authentication process. And again, the OAuth URI is defined locally, and that's the URI that Salesforce documentation told me to use to authenticate over OAuth. And again, OAuth, the spec is it's not thick, it's not a lot of fun to read. Unless you're a web developer and you're really into that kind of stuff. So again, I was looking for a really quick, fast solution, and this was it. So I mean, just to give you an idea, how many of you are developers in the room? How many of you consider yourself software developers, right? How long would it take you to set up an OAuth server, like using a common library, right? Like if you were downloading, like I forget what the name of it is, but one of the common OAuth libraries that's available on NuGet, and you're setting up your own web server, like how long do you think that would take? All right, let me rephrase it. Minutes, hours, days, weeks. Weeks to learn it. Yeah, which actually that is true. Like understanding it's not a lot of, it's not easy. Like I would say if you're lucky, hours, right? Days is probably a more accurate guess. But since PowerShell is so like close to the bone and just works, right? I can just set up a server and run that script when I call you over HTTP and it just works. This was part of Hack Day. I got this done in a couple of hours, right? And again, I'm not an OAuth expert, right? I just I've looked at it before and I knew how it worked, so I walked into it with that knowledge.
Jim?
Yeah.
Quick question for you.
Yep.
I developed a Twitter PowerShell module,
Mm-hmm.
which uses OAuth, but I didn't have to use a server. Is there a different kind of?
Yeah, there's all, they call them workflows, and it just varies. So like there's OAuth, there's and I can't remember the names of them now, but I just saw the word bearer, and I want to say one of them's the bearer, but I don't think that's correct. But there's like a workflow. Yeah, there's like a workflow where the user's sitting there and giving you access. There's a workflow where it's a server to server. There's a workflow where, you know what I mean? So it's it's kind of a mess to understand. I mean, it's actually I think it's fairly well thought out, but it's kind of a mess to understand. So that was like the biggest part of Hack Day, was trying to figure out how to get this web-based authentication to work from the console. And like I said, I mean, it works. I'm not gonna lie to you, I'm surprised it works. Like you saw me like during the demo, like, well, maybe not. Well, forgot to run it as administrator, so it's not gonna work. But literally, like once we have that token, that active token variable, and that handshake is set up, I'm done. I don't have to worry about OAuth anymore for the rest of my session. I can use any of these other APIs. So if we go back, like the original source of the conversation was, we're searching Salesforce, which came down to this function get Salesforce object, and this is basically the front end to their REST API, being able to hit their servers. Right, so I just use the Salesforce token, and I just do an HTTP GET on that URI that I have for that object, or in this case, it's the search. And then, like I said, once I have that code, it just works. I can get the data back and forth. The nice thing is once that nut was cracked, with I was able to authenticate with Salesforce, which was the big one, right? That was that's supposed to be where we're going to get our information from. So if I can get information from Salesforce, I know it's accurate. That was in air quotes for the recording watchers. But once I had that working, all of a sudden it worked for Trello too. Like I could do this, I could just employ the same code for Trello, and Smartsheet uses OAuth, so that suddenly became open to me. But it just became this really neat thing where, like, all of a sudden it's like, yeah, okay, I can pull data from Salesforce into PowerShell, and I can pull data from Trello into PowerShell, and that's always sort of the first automation step for me is gather. I want information to come to me, I want objects to come to me, and then the next step is sort of the reverse of that, which is scatter. Right? I want to be able to reach out to Trello and create a new board, and I want to be able to touch the cards on the board. And that was my goal for Hack Day. Like I wanted to be able to take data from Salesforce and manipulate it in the shell, and then create something in Trello based on that data. Right. So I mean, at this point, you guys are driving this. We got about 15 more minutes. So I could either show you that. I could show you pulling data out of Salesforce and turning it around and putting it in Trello in an automated way. We could look at some more of the authentication code. We could look at how I'm wrapping the REST APIs. What's of interest here?
I have a question. You doing selects like SQL selects?
Yeah. So this is actually.
Let you do that.
I'm sorry.
I'm surprised they let you do that.
Well, it's actually just part of the Salesforce API. Like Salesforce is this huge dynamic schema. Like I mean, it's literally like this is why I don't understand it, right? Salesforce comes into a company like, our schema is completely dynamic and you can do anything you want with it. Well, the same thing is true of the code I haven't written yet. Like if I don't know how to sell that, right? Thank you for laughing, by the way. But yeah, so like that query syntax is just part of the Salesforce API. It's what they support. So they're like when you go in there, like I want to look for accounts or account tags or whatever schema thing I've created, and the best part is like the syntax is just different enough from SQL to be annoying, and you have to remember like some little tiny details. Like this case is very simple. It's identical, but they've got some special things in there, magic things that should. No, it is like that. If I actually had a schema set up in SQL Server, I could run that query, and it would work, right? But in most cases, it's not. It's a little bit different.
One thing that I struggled with whenever I created that Twitter module was actually generating the signature, the OAuth signature to actually pass.
Yeah.
That was an enormous pain. How did you do that?
I'm not.
you're
Actually,
not?
no. And again, it's part of the workflows, whether you have to do that or not. And I just lucked out, and Trello. Trello's a little bit different, actually. Trello, I was able to get a token for my. I'll show you that right now. I was able to get a token for my account that's time based, right? So I actually can go to the browser and type an URL in Trello, and in return it comes back to me with this really long access code. But that's what I was removing from this code was the value of this token, which again, this is Hack Day, not an Enterprise Software Day. But I was able to acquire that a priori. Not all APIs support that. But yeah, that's actually one of the biggest issues is the cryptography aspect of it, because it is a nightmare, because we're used to working, especially as scripters, we're used to working with text, right? And really, you're not working with text, you're working with encoded bytes. And well, it's not just encoded, it's the order of the encoding, and so now all of a sudden, you hash something on Windows, a string, hello world, and you pass it to the Linux server, and it tries to compare that to your hashed password, and they're different because your bytes are little Indian and theirs are big Indian, or vice versa, or whatever it is. I hit that like all the time, and it's so frustrating. And honestly, I'm kind of surprised that we just haven't fixed that yet. That is not a solved problem.
Did you have to worry about parameter order, like when you were doing a REST post or whatever? Frames had to be in a certain order.
Typically not. Like so, for example, this is actually this function get Trello authorization token. this is I created a function to get that long string that I need to access it. And if you look at the if you look at the parameters here, again, it's just the URL, right? And it's sort of the same thing. You sort of encode the parameters with names and values. So as long as the names are right, it seems to be okay. Was that your question? All right. Yeah. So and most REST APIs are that way. It's very rare that you have like an unnamed parameter in a REST API. They're very strict on the names. But you can see, like on Hack Day, I actually thought, yeah, I should probably use the data protection API to secure that token that you can use to access all of my Trello data. Yeah.
Just as a quick automation, instead of read host on its token line, could you just do get web request and read the URL? Read the token that way?
Yes, I could. So, well, let's actually let's try this. So if I Yeah, don't look, by the way. I'm going to have to change these now. I didn't realize these were in here. I'll have to change these now. So I'm going to define my app key, and then what I'm going to do is copy this URL. Right now I'm just verifying that, all right, the app key got in there. So like what's actually happening, and the reason I don't do a web request, this is why, shoot. So what happens, well, it's on the clipboard now, right? Let me pipe that to the clipboard real quick. What actually happens when you go to that URL for Trello, and again, this is not sort of a standard workflow. This is something that Trello does on its own. It comes back with this. Like, this is part of OAuth. Do you want this to happen or not? Do you want to allow access or not? And I say yes, absolutely allow. And instead of like delivering something that's machine readable, which is what normally happens in OAuth, it sort of posts back to a URL, it just dumps this web page on me. And the reason why is because like this token is not really, it's not really like an official OAuth code in the sense that it's an API access token that Trello's using to give me access for a certain period of time. So I actually have to copy that out either into my session or into the code. Like, I'd probably go into the HTML and pull it out, but I opted not to do that. Again, I was trying to get like multiple things working, so I was trying to find a common ground. But where's the code? There it is. Let's see, what else? What other questions you guys have? Yeah. So, so I mean, most part, like these days, it's really easy because PowerShell includes the invoke REST method. Like when I call get Trello board, literally what's happening is it's just invoking this URL, right? And since I invoke REST method, it sort of looks at the headers that are coming back and figures out what's the structure of the data. Is it XML? Is it JSON? And pulls out the necessary bits and makes them PowerShell objects that you can use on the pipeline. The only interesting thing that happens really, it's hard to do that when invoke REST method isn't there. There's actually quite a bit of stuff that has to happen to get it working the same way.
Have you encountered where the JSON that you return starts off with the JavaScript code with no error? So I've got a couple applications to do that. I can't use invoke REST method because it messes up the JSON code.
Oh, that's interesting. So like I've never seen that. So they'll actually put in like a throw error at the start of the JSON just to keep someone from running it. I've never seen that, but that's very interesting. That again, it feels kind of hackish. It feels like the like the way they used to comment out like certain things in JavaScript in the browser, but they would magically just sort of be interpreted. This is kind of what that feels like. But no, I've never encountered that. I mean, there is some weirdness. Like the Salesforce JSON that was coming back was not. I couldn't parse it. It wasn't parsing automatically. So I actually had to go. I found this code online that actually manually deserializes the JSON into. And again, I don't remember where I got it from. I didn't mark it down, but there it is.
Parse out the first line and then do the first
Yeah, and it was something very similar to that. Like the JSON they're returning wasn't really JSON; it had something wrong with it. But they were like, "We're Salesforce," you know, and it was something like so silly as like the type of quote they were using or something. Like you know, it was just. And unfortunately, like when you're using invoke REST method, there's no intercept of you can't get the data coming back. Oh, let me just change all the quotes and then turn it to JSON. It doesn't work that way. It does it all or it doesn't work at all. So I had to handle all that, which is kind of a pain in the butt. But again, it's PowerShell, so I can just take that C# code and drop it right in there and run it as my own. So the Trello API is a lot cleaner. They've done a really good job with it, actually. And again, you can see like a lot of the code here, like when you start getting into actually doing things like creating a new Trello board, it's actually really, really simple. Invoke REST method, there's the URI I want to hit. It's a post method, and the body is the authentication stuff that I have, which is that auth variable, and the parameter, the name of the board that I want to create. And again, if I let's see. Right, so I'm creating a Trello board with the name PSH Summit. And so I'll go ahead and run that. And it returns back the object that it created, right? But if I go over to my Trello boards, and if I look at my boards now, there it is, PSH Summit, and do something really silly like from 0 to 20. For each of those, let's do a new Trello card where the name is, item whatever. Oh no, we have to do. Let's see, we'll do. Just copy that. Nope, that wasn't right. Is it ID? Nope.
You might have had too many D's in your board.
Oh, interesting. Well, it's
In the parameter name.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think you called it boarded.
Oh,
I
okay.
could be wrong.
Could not find the board the card belongs to. That's interesting. So let's see. Did it actually do anything? Nope. Anyway, yeah. So, this is again. It's been a while since I've used this. Let's try this. If I do a get Trello board, where the name matches PSH Summit. Yeah, so I found the board, and then now that I have the board, I want to create, do a new Trello card.
Are you doing all?
Yeah, you just deleted our filter.
Oh, God, thank you. It's been a really nice surprise at work. Jim? What, Mike?
We got 20 links.
What? Why would you think it was me? Which is like, that's one of my favorite things about automation, right? And people talk about automating things. I'm like, yeah, it's like the best way to like be wrong at scale, It's like, this is mine.
Why is this collection empty? I don't know.
Okay, I don't know why it's not doing it. Swear it worked. Swear. But yeah, again, this is one of those things where it's a hack. So, I probably changed something in the gets, and now it's not working. So, let's see, what else can we talk about? We have about 5 minutes. Is there any other questions about?
So you're going to show us the automation from Salesforce to Trello?
Well, I'd love to, but
Well, in that hack world, kind of hacky thing, just the idea of,
Oh, I know why.
building your own objects and integrating different systems. So you gotta, creating your own custom object to get some data from here and put it there, and
Yeah.
just what are some kind of tips and tricks on trying to build that framework?
Yeah, so like the big thing, like you'll get objects back. Like, okay, Trello's a great example. Trello returns objects Most of them are very useful, but their API is kind of convoluted when you start asking questions about the cards, like what happened to this card. Like the simplest question would be, when was the card created? Right? That's an easy question. You would think a lot of people would be asking that, and in fact they are. And they're like, well, there's no field for that, but the data's in there. And it's like literally like, because we use Mongo, the ID for the card, the first 8 characters, like here, let me show you the code. Actually, the first 8 characters are actually, let's see, where is it? The first 8 characters are actually the Unix encoded timestamp of the thing. So you could just pull that out and, where's the actual definition? There. Yeah, that's exactly what this is. So they're like, oh, we need the time the card was created. So instead of just giving you that data, we're going to tell you to go into the ID and parse out the first 8 bytes, or the first 8 numbers, which is a hexadecimal number, which is actually the Unix timestamp of when that card was created. See? Easy, right? And like, why don't you just have a field in there that's like card created, So there's little things like that are really, really annoying. And anytime I encounter something like that, I wrap them in something like this. Like I have this add Trello field, and you'll notice that like every time, or almost every time, I'm returning like a card, I pipe the results that I get from Trello through this add Trello fields to just create that simple wrapper around that difficult data. That's very common. Like once you have like the base structure working, like okay, I'm getting the objects back. You start spending a lot of time just sort of growing the convenience functions, right? Because that's why we're doing this.
Scroll back down to that part.
Yeah. So do you have a question, or just wanted to see it?
I just wanted to see.
But yeah, which by the way, I've written this particular code, like getting a like transferring like from a Unix timestamp to a date time. I've probably written that line of code like 100 times.
Yeah, is there not a date function for that?
I don't think so. Not that I'm aware of.
Unix string.
What's that?
There is a Unix timestamp.
There is? Well, who knew? Well, you did actually. You knew. So, all
Written it several times.
right. Will you show me that later? Actually, all right, thanks. Start looking, because. All right.
You're on the clock.
Yeah.
Before you push the button.
All right. So yeah, I mean, I know this has been a very organic session, and I'm just trying to show you things that are interesting, things that were very difficult to figure out, and I'm very happy that I figured out. The OAuth thing is the big one, right? It sounds like I'm getting the impression, like, I don't know, there's like a vapor that a blog post about that might be worthwhile, right? Because you're not going to remember anything. Like, he showed me this posh server thing. Okay, so I'll write up a blog post about that, right? And I'll send out a tweet. I'll hash it with PSH Summit. And in fact, I might just work on that this morning. So look for that later today. Yeah.
So there's clearly lots of value in this. I'm curious how you expose it to others in your organization. Just what your thoughts are on it in general.
Yeah, it's a great question. So it is very powerful. One of the nice things is that OAuth is it's tenant focused. So like you're like I'm Jim Christopher when I'm using Trello, even from the console. So when I give it to somebody else, like they're them, and then they can touch their stuff, but they can't touch mine, and I'm okay with that. The only one that I worry about is Salesforce. But then the more I think about it, like, well, really, you can't do anything from the console. You can't do in the UI. The sort of the counter to that is you can't mess up anything in the console that you can't mess up in the UI. So if they have access to it and they can mess it up, that's kind of my out. Generally, there's very few people who actually use this, right? What happens now is we'll get into a situation where we'll be talking in a meeting. It's like, well, we got all this data in Salesforce. If only we had it, in a spreadsheet to do this. And like, hey, Jim, can you get Amelia on that? And I'm like, oh, I just did it while you were talking. It's like, that's what this is for. So we're at a time. I did figure out why this wasn't working. So we have cards, but the cards have to live on a board. So I have to get the list of boards from the thing, and I'll get the one where the name matches to do. All right, so I get that, and then what I'm going to do is create a new Trello card with a name. Hello. Yeah, so there it worked, and then if I go back here, it's there. But that's the thing. That's the thing I love about PowerShell is like I just created a new Trello card, and I could have created it based on dynamic data. It doesn't care where that data came from, right? So if I can get data out of Salesforce, now all of a sudden I can get it into Trello. If I can get data out of SQL or that spreadsheet or that file, I can get it wherever I need it to go. And that's why I keep focusing on PowerShell for automation is because I can do that, right? And it sort of magically works. You know, you get like all this stuff for free. Like literally, somebody literally asked me once, like, well, what if I have like a set of Azure VMs with names and I wanted to take their names and use those to create SQL tables? I'm like, yeah, I guess, you know, if you need to do that, yeah, you can use PowerShell to do that, I guess. That's fine. Have fun with that. So, all right. So thank you guys for coming. We're out of time. I got to change my secrets and my keys for Trello because I just exposed them and they're going to be on YouTube. Yeah. Yeah, right now. Let me push the button. Is that okay? All right.